A very religious woman has a parrot that prays. He sits at the bottom of his cage, whispering prayers all day. She brags about her bird to everyone she meets. One day she is bragging, and a man says that he has a female parrot who is always swearing. They decide that it would be a good idea to put them together so the female parrot can learn from the praying male parrot. So the man brings his female parrot over and they put her in the cage. The male parrot looks up at her from his prayer and says, "Thank God, my prayers have been answered." A man walks into a cozy diner on a chilly evening, craving something warm and hearty. He glances at the menu, but his decision is instant. "I'll have a bowl of chili," he tells the waitress with a smile. The waitress, with an apologetic shrug, replies, "I'm sorry, hun, but the guy next to you just got the last bowl." The man looks over at the other diner, who seems to be done with his meal. Strangely, the bowl of chili in front of him remains untouched. Unable to resist his craving, the man asks, "Hey, are you going to eat that chili?" The other diner shakes his head, waving it off. "Nope, go ahead." Gratefully, the man slides the bowl over and digs in. The chili is warm, flavorful, and exactly what he needed. Spoonful after spoonful, he savors every bite, until he gets about halfway through. Then his spoon hits something solid. Curious, he peers into the bowl. His stomach churns as he sees a dead mouse nestled among the chili. The man immediately retches, spewing the chili he had just enjoyed back into the bowl. As he sits there, wiping his mouth in horror, the other diner chuckles and says, "Yeah, that's about as far as I got too." For an experiment, a chemistry teacher takes out a $20 bill and puts it in a bottle of ethanol. He then asks his students if it will dissolve. A student raises his hand to answer. Student: "No, it won't dissolve, sir." Teacher: "Really good. Now can you explain to the rest of the class why?" Student: "You're so cheap. There's no way you would have sacrificed that $20. A 54-year-old man feels guilty about cheating on his wife, so he leaves her a note. "I've been sleeping with a girl 1/3 my age." The woman finds his note and leaves him one of her own. "I know you've been sleeping with an 18-year-old, but so have I. Since you like math so much, 18 goes into 54. A lot more than 54 goes into 18. A priest was being honored at his retirement dinner after 25 years in the parish. A leading local politician and member of the congregation was chosen to make the presentation and give a little speech at the dinner. He was delayed, so the priest decided to say his own few words while they waited. "I got my first impression of the parish from the first confession I heard here. I thought I had been assigned to a terrible place. The very first person who entered my confessional told me he had stolen a television set, and when questioned by the police, was able to lie his way out of it. He had stolen money from his parents, embezzled from his employer, had an affair with his boss's wife, taken illegal drugs, and gave VD to his sister. I was appalled, but as the days went on, I knew that my people were not all like that, and I had indeed come to a fine parish full of good and loving people." Just as the priest finished his talk, the politician arrived full of apologies at being late. He immediately began to make the presentation and gave his talk. "I'll never forget the first day our parish priest arrived," said the politician. "In fact, I had the..." While Mrs. Jones is cooking dinner, she sees that the cookie jar is open and that it is wet and sticky. She goes to her husband and asks him about it. He says he has no idea. Then she walks into her son Little Billy's room. She is shocked to see him eating cookies with condoms on his hands. "Why do you have condoms on your hands?" she asked him. He looks at her and says, "I heard Daddy on the phone. He said when he uses them, you never catch him." A young blonde pilot is in her first flying lesson in a two-seater plane. Her instructor all of a sudden gets a heart attack and dies. "Mayday! Mayday! Help me! Help me! My instructor pilot is dead and I don't know how to fly." She hears a voice over the radio saying, "This is air traffic control. We can hear you loud and clear. I will talk you through this and get you back on the ground safely. I've had a lot of experiences with this kind of problem. Now just take a deep breath. Everything will be fine. Give me your height and position." The blonde replies, "I'm 5'7" and in the front seat." After a long pause, "Okay," says the voice in the radio. "Now repeat after me. Our Father who art in heaven." Upon hearing that her elderly grandfather had just passed away, Katie went straight to her grandparents' house to visit her 95-year-old grandmother and comfort her. When she asked how her grandfather had died, her grandmother replied, "He had a heart attack while we were making love on Sunday morning." Horrified, Katie told her grandmother that two people nearly 100 years old having would surely be asking for trouble. "Oh no, my dear," replied Granny. "Many years ago, realizing our advanced age, we figured out the best time to do it was when the church bells would start to ring. It was just the right rhythm, nice and slow and even. Nothing too strenuous, simply in on the ding and out on the dong." She paused to wipe away a tear and continued, "He'd still be alive if the ice cream van hadn't come along." Husband's message. "Honey, I got hit by a car outside of the office. Tina brought me to hospital. They have been making tests and x-rays. The blow to my head, though, is very strong. Will not have any serious or lasting injury. But I have 3 broken ribs, a broken arm, a compound fracture in the left, and they may have to amputate the right foot." Wife's response. "Who's Tina?" This evening, I stopped by Kroger wearing one of my husband's oversized sweatshirts. As I got in line at the checkout, the man in front of me glanced over and casually asked, "Is that your sweatshirt?" His question caught me off guard, but I smiled and replied, "Oh no, it's my husband's." He paused, looked at me thoughtfully, and asked, "Is your husband nearby? I'd like to thank him." With a bittersweet smile, I explained, "Actually, he's deployed right now." Without hesitation, the man began placing my groceries on the conveyor belt along with his own. Then, to my astonishment, he turned to me and said, "I've got your groceries tonight." I was speechless. All I could do was whisper, "Oh my gosh, are you sure? Thank you so much," over and over again. The man nodded, his expression deeply sincere. Then he shared something that stayed with me. "That place over there nearly took me away from my wife and my 4 kids. Promise me you'll stay true and honest to him while he's gone, and when he gets home, love him like you never have before." Even now, hours later, I'm still in awe of the kindness and connection I experienced in such an unexpected moment. It reminded me that goodness truly does exist in this world, often in ways we don't anticipate. Maybe if we focus on looking for that goodness, it will outshine the darker things we're so accustomed to seeing. Tonight, I'm grateful for a stranger's generosity and the reminder that small acts of kindness can carry profound meaning. The haughty, upper-class wife was talking about Christmas gifts with her maid. "What do you think we should get for the butler?" the wealthy woman asked. "Perhaps a set of wine glasses," the maid suggested. The woman gave a cold, disapproving look. "He has no need for that. A butler doesn't host parties. He'll get a tie." The maid suppressed a grimace and continued. "What about a dress for Jenny, the serving girl?" The woman frowned again. "She doesn't need a new dress. That would only lead to trouble. She'll get another apron." As the conversation went on in this manner, the maid grew increasingly irritated by her employer's arrogance. Finally, the discussion reached the husband. "I suppose you'd like to get him something truly useful, madam?" the maid asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Naturally," the woman replied. "In that case," the maid said, unable to resist, "how about 3 more inches?" The weather was very hot, and this man wanted desperately to take a dive in a nearby lake. He didn't bring his swimming trunks, but who cared? He was all alone. So he undressed and got into the water. After some delightful minutes of cool swimming, a pair of old ladies walked onto the shore in his direction. He panicked, got out of the water, and grabbed a bucket lying in the sand nearby. He held the bucket in front of his private parts and sighed with relief, as they got closer. The ladies looked at him and giggled. Then one of the ladies said, "You know, I have a special gift. I can read minds." "Impossible," said the embarrassed man. "You really know what I think?" "Yes," the lady replied. "Right now, I bet you think that the bucket you're holding has a bottom." I found myself in a pub in Cork. A group of American tourists came in. One of the Americans said in a loud voice, "I hear you Irish think you're great drinkers. I bet €5,000 that no one here can drink 30 pints of Guinness in 30 minutes. The bar was silent. The American noticed one Irishman leaving. No one took up the bet. 40 minutes later, the Irishman who left returned and said, "Hey, Yank, is your wee bet still on?" "Sure," said the American. 30 pints in 30 minutes for a bet of €5,000. "Grand," replied the Irishman. "So pour the pints and start the clock." It was very close, but the last drop was consumed with 2 seconds to spare. "Okay, Yank, pay up," said the Irishman. "I'm happy to pay. Here's your money," said the American. "But tell me, when I first offered the wager, I saw you leave. Where did you go?" The Irishman replied, "Well, sir, €5,000 is a lot of money to a man like me. So I went to the pub across the road to see if I could do it." The old woman enters the doctor's room and the doctor asks her to sit on the table so he can examine her. He starts by testing her reflexes. The doctor takes out his reflex hammer and taps on one knee. The elderly woman gasps, but her leg doesn't jerk. Concerned, the doctor hits the other knee. Once again, the woman gasps, but her leg doesn't jerk. He asks the patient, "Do you have any difficulty walking?" The elderly woman says she indeed does. The doctor tries again and again and again to get a reflex out of the old woman's knees, but each time she only gasps. The doctor, concerned and analysing the situation, asks the old woman if she's feeling any pain or discomfort in her knees, and she replies, "No, doc, but can you stop with the hammer? My killing me." An airline captain was helping a new blonde flight attendant prepare for his first overnight trip. Upon their arrival, the captain showed the flight attendant the best place for airline personnel to eat, shop, and stay overnight. The next morning, as the pilot was preparing the crew for the day's route, he noticed the new attendant was missing. He knew which room he was in at the hotel, and so he called him up, wondering what happened to him. He answered the phone in distress and said he couldn't get out of his room. You can't get out of your room. The captain asked. Why not? There are only 3 doors in here. The man groaned. One leads to the bathroom, one leads to the closet, and one has a sign on it that says, Do not disturb. Doctor, how did your lips get so swollen? The girl, I was lost in the woods and found an old man. Doctor, but how exactly? Girl, I was, talking to him. Doctor, curious, asks, What happened during the conversation? Girl, shyly, I accidentally bit my lips while speaking. A timekeeper at a factory is in charge of blowing the whistle for the lunch break at noon. When it's almost noon, she looks at her watch, and right when it strikes 12 p.m., she blows the whistle. One day she bumps her watch against something, and she fears that it is a little off. Wanting to make sure that she can do her job correctly, she decides to go get her watch set by a professional clockmaker. The woman goes to the shop and has the clockmaker set her watch to the correct time. She tells the clockmaker what she does for a living, and that it is important that her watch keeps correct time. The clockmaker tells her that she needn't worry because he set his watch by the clocks in the back, and that he can be sure that they're on time because he sets them every Sunday when the church bells ring at 6 a.m. The woman leaves the shop satisfied, but starts to ask herself, how does the church know exactly when it is 6 a.m.? So she goes to the church and finds the bell ringer and asks him how does he know when to ring the bells and how does he make sure that he has the correct time. The bell ringer tells her that he rings the bells right when his watch strikes 6 a.m. I'm sure my watch is accurate. He reassures her. I check it every day at noon when the factory goes on break. A timekeeper at a factory is in charge of blowing the whistle for the lunch break at noon. When it's almost noon, she looks at her watch, and right when it strikes 12 p.m., she blows the whistle. One day she bumps her watch against something, and she fears that it is a little off. Wanting to make sure that she can do her job correctly, she decides to go get her watch set by a professional clockmaker. The woman goes to the shop and has the clockmaker set her watch to the correct time. She tells the clockmaker what she does for a living, and that it is important that her watch keeps correct time. The clockmaker tells her that she needn't worry because he set his watch by the clocks in the back, and that he can be sure that they're on time because he sets them every Sunday when the church bells ring at 6 a.m. The woman leaves the shop satisfied, but starts to ask herself, how does the church know exactly when it is 6 a.m.? So she goes to the church and finds the bell ringer and asks him how does he know when to ring the bells and how does he make sure that he has the correct time. The bell ringer tells her that he rings the bells right when his watch strikes 6 a.m. I'm sure my watch is accurate. He reassures her. I check it every day at noon when the factory goes on break. In prison, a fellow inmate struck up a conversation with a priest who had just arrived. Inmate: So, what landed you in here? Priest, lowering his voice: Well, I had an affair, and the nun ended up pregnant. Inmate: Man, why didn't you just use protection? Priest: Some religious scholars say it's not exactly permissible. Dorothy and Edna, two old-age senior widows, are talking. Dorothy: That nice George Johnson asked me out for a date. I know you went out with him last week, and I wanted to talk with you about him before I give him my answer. Edna: Well, I'll tell you. What happened last week? He shows up at my apartment punctually at 7 p.m., dressed like such a gentleman in a fine suit, and he brings me such beautiful flowers. Then he takes me downstairs, and what's there but a luxury car? A limousine, uniformed chauffeur and all. Then he takes me out for dinner. A marvellous dinner. Lobster, champagne, dessert, and after-dinner drinks. Then we go see a show. Let me tell you, Dorothy, I enjoyed it so much I could have just died from pleasure. So then we are coming back to my apartment and he turns into an animal. Completely crazy. He tears off my expensive new dress and made love of his way with me 2 times. Dorothy, goodness gracious, so you are telling me I shouldn't go out with him? Edna, no. I'm just saying, wear an old dress. Reaching the end of a job interview, the human resources officer asked a young engineer fresh out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, "And what starting salary are you looking for?" The engineer replies, "In the region of $125,000 a year, depending on the benefits package." The interviewer inquires, "Well, what would you say to a package of 5 weeks vacation, 14 paid holidays, full medical and dental, company matching retirement fund to 50% of salary, and a company car leased every 2 years? Say, a red Corvette?" The engineer sits up straight and says, "Wow, are you kidding?" The interviewer replies, "Yeah, but you started it." 3 guys go in for a job interview. The first guy goes in and kicks best job interview he's ever done in his life. End of the interview comes around. The interviewer says, "By the way, do you notice anything strange about me?" "Yeah," says the guy. "You don't have any ears, man." "I'm sorry," says the interviewer, "but I'm very sensitive about my ears. I'm afraid you're not the right person for this job. Get the out of my office." The second guy goes in. It's the same thing. He is doing amazing best job interview ever. Talks himself into $20K a year more than the advertised salary. End of the interview comes around. The interviewer says, "By the way, do you notice anything strange about me?" "Yeah," says the guy. "You don't have any ears, man." "I'm sorry," says the interviewer, "but I'm very sensitive about my ears. I'm afraid you're not the right person for this job. Get out of my office." So the third guy's about to go in, but the first and second guy stop him and warn him, "Hey, I don't care how good you're doing, how comfortable you feel. Don't say anything about his ears. He'll throw you right out." So the third guy goes in. Again, same thing. An amazing interview. End of the interview comes around. The interviewer says, "By the way, do you notice anything strange about me?" Third guy looks real close, squints his eyes a bit and says, "Yeah, you wear contact lenses, don't you?" "Wow," says the interviewer. "That is really perceptive of you. How did you know?" "Well," says guy 3, "you sure as couldn't wear glasses." A couple in Sweetwater, Texas had a lot of potted plants. During a recent cold spell, the wife was bringing a lot of them indoors to protect them from a possible freeze. It turned out that a little green garden grass snake was hidden in one of the plants. When it had warmed up, it slithered out, and the wife saw it go under the sofa. She let out a very loud scream. The husband, who was taking a shower, ran out into the living room to see what the problem was. She told him there was a snake under the sofa. He got down on the floor on his hands and knees to look for it. About that time, the family dog came and cold-nosed him on the behind. He thought the snake had bitten him, so he screamed and fell over on the floor. His wife thought he had had a heart attack, so she covered him up, told him to lie still, and called an ambulance. The attendants rushed in, would not listen to his protests, loaded him on the stretcher, and started carrying him out. About that time, the snake came out from under the sofa, and the emergency medical technician saw it and dropped his end of the stretcher. That's when the man broke his leg and why he is still in the hospital. The wife still had the problem of the snake in the house, so she called on a neighbour who volunteered to capture the snake. He armed himself with a rolled-up newspaper and began poking under the couch. Soon he decided it was gone, and told the woman, who sat down on the sofa in relief. But while relaxing, her hand dangled in between the cushions where she felt the snake wriggling around. She screamed and fainted. The snake rushed back under the sofa. The neighbour man, seeing her lying there, passed out, tried to use CPR to revive her. The neighbour's wife, who had just returned from shopping at the grocery store, saw her husband's mouth on the woman's mouth and slammed her husband in the back of the head with a bag of canned goods, knocking him out and cutting his scalp to a point where it needed stitches. The noise woke the woman from her dead faint, and she saw her neighbour lying on the floor with his wife bending over him, so she assumed that the snake had bitten him. She went to the kitchen and got a small bottle of whiskey and began pouring it down the man's throat. By now, the police had arrived. "Breathe here." They saw the unconscious man, smelled the whiskey, and assumed that a drunken fight had occurred. They were about to arrest them all when the women tried to explain how it all happened over a little garden snake. The police called an ambulance, which took away the neighbour and his sobbing wife. Now, the little snake again crawled out from under the sofa, and one of the policemen drew his gun and fired at it. He missed the snake and hit the leg of the end table. The table fell over, the lamp on it shattered, and as the bulb broke, it started a fire in the drapes. The other policeman tried to beat out the flames and fell through the window into the yard on top of the family dog, who, startled, jumped out and raced into the street, where an oncoming car swerved to avoid it and smashed into the parked police car. Meanwhile, neighbours saw the burning drapes and called in the fire department. The firemen had started raising the fire ladder when they were halfway down the street. The rising ladder tore out the overhead wires, put out the power, and disconnected the telephones in a 10-square city block area. But they did get the house fire out. Time passed. Both men were discharged from the hospital. The house was repaired. The dog came home. The police acquired a new car, and all was right with their world. A while later, they were watching TV, and the weatherman announced a cold snap for that night. The wife asked her husband if he thought they should bring in their plants for the night, and that's when he shot her. It was nearly Christmas, and Judge Judy was in a happy mood. She asked the defendant, "What are you being prosecuted for?" The defendant replied, "Doing my Christmas shopping too early." "That's not a crime," replied Judge Judy. "How early were you doing your Christmas shopping?" "Before the store opened," replied the defendant. Little Johnny's neighbour just had a baby. Sadly, the baby was born without any ears. When the mum and baby came back home from the hospital, Johnny's family was invited over to see the baby. Before they left their house, little Johnny's dad had a chat with him and explained how the baby had no ears. Johnny's dad also told him that if he so much as mentioned anything about the baby's missing ears, or even said the word ears, he would get the hiding of his life when they came back home. Little Johnny told his dad he understood and agreed not to mention the baby's lack of ears. Johnny looks in the bassinet and says, "Wow, what a beautiful baby." The mother replies, "Why? Thanks, Johnny." Johnny says, "He has beautiful little feet, beautiful little hands, a cute little nose, and really beautiful eyes. Is he able to see all right?" "Yes," says the mum. "We are so grateful. The doctor said he will have perfect vision." "That is great," says little Johnny, "'cause he'd be stuffed if he needed glasses." 3 engineers and 3 accountants are travelling by train to a conference. At the station, the 3 accountants each buy tickets and watch as the 3 engineers buy only a single ticket. "How are 3 people going to travel on only 1 ticket?" asks an accountant. "Watch and you'll see," answers an engineer. They all board the train. The accountants take their respective seats, but all 3 engineers cram into a restroom and close the door behind them. Shortly after the train has departed, the conductor comes around collecting tickets. He knocks on the restroom door and says, "Ticket, please." The door opens, just a crack, and a single arm emerges, with a ticket in hand. The conductor takes it and moves on. The accountant saw this and agreed it was quite a clever idea. So after the conference, the accountants decide to copy the engineers on the return trip and save some money. When they get to the station, they buy a single ticket for the return trip. To their astonishment, the engineers don't buy a ticket at all. "How are you going to travel without a ticket?" asks one perplexed accountant. "Watch and you'll see," answers an engineer. When they board the train, the 3 accountants cram into a restroom, and the 3 engineers cram into another one nearby. The train departs. Shortly afterward, one of the engineers leaves his restroom and walks over to the restroom where the accountants are hiding. He knocks on the door and says, "Ticket, please,"